I'm Scott from Fabian Liberty. What do I call police? I call them Oathbreakers. And in this video today, I'm going to be discussing why I call them Oathbreakers and why I think you should begin calling them Oathbreakers too. Now, libertarians have been sounding the alarm on police practices and issues since the 1970s. And it's only until recently that social movements and the media and change has really begun to show some of these issues involved around policing. Namely, it's been about racism with police practices. And racism has really begun to divide our country in the way we talk about policing. I remember as a young burgeoning mind, the riots in was it the Michael Brown riots, the stand up, don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot movement. And I remember being so for it. I was like, yes, let's get body camera footage on police officers. Let's get them better training, right? Like, let's increase the standards by which they hire. And instead it became a movement about the race of the individuals. And it was really disheartening because this discussion of race really took away the discussion of some of the actual issues of policing. Now, you may say, well, racism is an actual issue. It's the biggest issue that we have. And I'm sure some would be inclined to agree. I don't necessarily agree. But there are a lot of things that we can fix now that are not divisive in this country. The war on drugs has failed miserably. No one that I know of is in support of no-knock warrants and authoritarian lockdowns by police during COVID, over-policing, stop and frisk laws, the way peaceful and violent protests are handled by the police, and corrupt district attorneys and detectives that are forcing witnesses to confess to crimes that they didn't do, or 98%, I believe, 97% of cases are not actually seen before a jury, but district attorneys are using their power to increase the amount of convictions by simply overcharging individuals, often black and of low socioeconomic status, so that they plead down to 15, 20 years in prison. And so in this video, I'm going to explain the term oathbreaker, and I'm going to show you why police are objectively oathbreakers and why this term is so much more effective than other terms that we're using to describe police today. First, let's talk about the logic behind the term oathbreaker, right? For a term to actually effectively work, I think it needs to have some logical consistency. And first and foremost, all police officers in this country have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, usually to protect from enemies both foreign and domestic. Furthermore, all police have violated this oath, right? I'm going to show in this video how basic police practices, not radical police, not police departments in specific areas, or police, individual police officers that make high-profile cases, but the overwhelming majority of police departments in this country have violated the original meanings and language of the Constitution, and therefore all police are oathbreakers. The second thing I want to discuss is that the modern slurs that we use to attack police officers, they're not effective. They just don't work. You see plenty of videos from protests or from angry citizens that are, have reason to be angry at the police, calling them things like pig or fascist. And the simple fact of the matter is that police are not animals. They're humans. They're your neighbors. They're citizens. And they're not fascists. You may think that they work within a system that has become fascistic, right? I think, elderly individuals from Italy might disagree, but regardless, they're not fascists, right? They're not specifically propping up corporate and jingoistic powers. They're propping up the state, sure, and they may prop up corporations, but they're also propping up social movements such as Black Lives Matter. Look at the police handling of the mural in New York. You'll see them specifically protecting illegal graffiti that was done in the names of Black Lives Matter and arresting individuals that have different ideological bents, right? So calling them fascist is really an oversimplification of the issues of the state. And lastly, the slur doesn't attack what they value, which I would say is honor, brotherhood, fraternity, right? You have the fraternal orderhood of the police. Police officers tend to really think highly of themselves. I'm sure you've seen plenty of videos of overly egomaniacal police officers, exercising their power to the full limit and sometimes beyond. But regardless of those bad apples, the majority of police belong to a brotherhood, and they think they're doing right because they're doing a hard job that needs to be done. Personally, I'm for privatized police. But regardless, an overwhelming majority of us would agree that we need police in some capacity and that it's a dangerous job. And they have a system of honor because they feel like they're doing hero work, when really they're violating the Constitution, and I would argue they are oath breakers. So in order to illustrate how police are oath breakers, in the next few slides, I'm going to go over a few amendments and a few basic police practices that almost every police department engages in that absolutely violates many of the Bill of Rights constitutional amendments before it could be ratified, namely and specifically the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and the Fourth Amendment. And I'm going to show how they have violated this oath, not because of a few bad apples, but because of policies and practices that nearly every police department follows.
I got to see.
Can I talk to you for a moment?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you have your ID?
Why do you need my ID?
I need to talk to you about a complaint from the neighborhood.
What's the complaint about?
The complaint is about sound amplification.
Well, that's a legal activity.
So looking at the First Amendment, the right to freedom of speech, the freedom to peaceably assemble, petition your government for, address your government for grievances, and the press, and freedom of religion. Again, I'm not going over egregious acts that some police departments have done. We all know that this is horrible when police officers in New York City are arresting Orthodox Jews for going to church because they're not following COVID lockdowns, right? This is a blatant violation of the First Amendment. And despite the fact that we've done nothing about it and no one has been punished, I'm not talking about these few bad police precincts or mayors or governors that have done terrible things. I'm talking about day-to-day practices. Now, police regularly interact against free speech. What do I mean by this? There are free speech auditors, First Amendment auditors, and individuals that protest regularly. And police often break up these protests. They enforce people in these little tiny areas that they call free speech zones, for their own safety and so that traffic doesn't get stopped. And they do this based off of ideological bent. You don't see police officers arresting terrorists in Portland, but you see them containing other individuals that want to protest at monuments in Virginia. And yet will see them in Portland arresting, Proud Boys or something like that. The fact of the matter is that many, many departments throughout this country have policies and practices that are against the First Amendment freedom of speech. They will often use things such as noise ordinances, offensive language, despite that the Constitution has protected offensive language specifically many times, and other things and permits and things like that to restrain and contain the freedom of speech, which is not what the Founding Fathers fought for.
Yeah. What? Yo, you are really on some wild right now. Oh man, I can't wait. You better hope this is legal.
The next big thing that I'd like to talk about is the Second Amendment, gun rights. All gun restrictions are unconstitutional. If you do not like it, you have to change the Constitution. The fact of the matter is that if you are a felon, the Constitution protects your right to have a gun. If you abuse your wife, the Constitution protects your right to have a gun. We may not like it, but that is the Constitution. And the government doesn't get to circumnavigate the Constitution because it doesn't fit with their narrative, with their ideas, or what they think a good society should be. They have to change the Constitution. Concealed carry laws are unconstitutional. So any police officer that has ever arrested someone for a gun crime is an oath breaker. They have broken their oath to uphold the Constitution from enemies both foreign and domestic, and they themselves have become an enemy of the Constitution. Now, as we go deeper into this issue, the Supreme Court has ruled on many cases that have kind of expanded the rights of the police in dealing with individuals carrying guns. Now, the biggest one is Terry v. Ohio in 1968. Basically, what occurred in this case was a police officer sees an individual casing a corner store and thinks it looks suspicious. He goes back, he sees him talking to someone, so he frisks him down. Now, he detained him, but he didn't have anything to arrest him with. And during that detainment process, he decided that he was going to frisk the individual and found a gun, and then arrested him for having a gun. Now, it was very clear in this case that this individual was about to rob that store, and the police officer probably did a good thing, helping protect and save lives. The problem is that the Terry stop has become a modern part of police practices. And it's not because there is reasonable suspicion that an individual is committing a crime. No, practices and policies throughout most of the counties and cities and municipalities of this country have regarded a Terry stop as constitutional for basically any reason. If you're being detained at all, then they can do a Terry stop, which is a stop and frisk, a pat down. We, famously saw Rudy Giuliani supposedly bring down crime in New York City because of his stop and frisk policies. When the actuality is the lead content in the water and the abortion rights legislation of the 1960s counteracted together to see a worldwide decrease in crime in the 1990s in all of the developed nations of the country, of the world, and New York didn't trend any differently than any other state, municipality, or country, and these stop and frisk laws did not help. If you simply look at the data, it proves it. What they did do, however, is create a horrible relationship between black communities in New York City and the state government and city government. Now, any Terry stop is unconstitutional. I don't care that the Supreme Court said, oh, well, it's okay because it's reasonable. Reasonable is not in the Second Amendment. It says shall not be infringed. Point blank, period. Now, yours reasonable is written into the Fourth Amendment, which we'll be discussing next, and that gets a little bit more gray, a little bit more murky. But the fact of the matter is any infringement upon gun rights is an infringement upon the Constitution. And so every police officer who has ever detained someone and conducted a Terry stop, which would be almost every police officer in the country unless they're a fresh day rookie, is an oathbreaker.
I didn't know y'all could be so stupid anymore. Everybody get out of the Jeep. You want to see how big of a police is going to be? I'm fixing to show you. We're fixing to search every one of you and every ounce of this Jeep. Now, so help me God, if I find one seed, every one of you is going to go to jail because of the police, son.
Next, let's discuss the Fourth Amendment. Now, the Fourth Amendment protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures. Kind of harkening back to what I said before, how does one define what is reasonable and what is unreasonable? The language is very murky, and so is a lot of the laws. But I think there's a good case to be made that the original intentions of the Founding Fathers would not match what our police state is currently doing to its citizens in any way, shape, or form. So the first big Supreme Court case, well, I guess not the first, but the major Supreme Court case I'd be talking about is Coolidge v. New Hampshire, 1971. And what this established was the plain view doctrine, which is to say that anything that is within plain view is a reason that a police officer can search your vehicle, your persons, your home, without a warrant in any way, shape, or form. So, for example, if you're in your living room and your window is open and your blinds are open, and I'm a police officer walking on the sidewalk and I can see you smoking a bowl, I might come knock on your door and say, hey, let me in. You're under, I'm going to search you now. I'm going to detain you for the suspicion. And now I get to search your home for said bowl. Now, this is not necessarily a bad idea, right? Like, obviously if you see someone committing a murder or you see someone committing a crime, right, you don't want to have to call someone up on the phone or write a letter, to have a judge sign a warrant, issue a warrant so that you can arrest someone or detain them and search for things that you need to find. Unfortunately, this plain view doctrine has been watered down to the point where it's not even really plain view, right? So there's something called the Horton test, which is, do you have reason to believe that they're committing a crime? Do you have like these other things that, are there exigent circumstances, which we'll talk about later? But so long as you have a reasonable, so long as you've detained someone for reasonable suspicion of a crime, then you can conduct a plain view search of everything around said crime, right? So for example, if I pull you over for speeding as a police officer, I can then detain you for speeding. Then I can handcuff you. I can tell you to sit down on the curb, and then I can take a flashlight and I can look all throughout your vehicle. And the moment I find, let's say, dirt on your floorboards, I can say, oh, those look like marijuana seeds. Now I can open up your vehicle and I can search your entire vehicle because I now have reasonable suspicion of marijuana. I saw that in a plain view because I saw some dirt on the ground. So now I'm just going to search your entire vehicle, right? This is clearly unconstitutional, and yet it is a very common practice in policing. Next, let's discuss exigent circumstances. There's no one Supreme Court case that deals with exigent circumstances. Instead, it's a body of law known as, English common law or American common law or, Texas common law, right? Which is to say Supreme Court cases, state Supreme Court cases, and things that have established, District Court of Appeal cases that have established precedent have created this idea of exigent circumstances, which is to say, well, you may have probable cause to search, but we're going to create a bunch of exceptions to that rule, some of which, seem very reasonable and some of which have been taken to their extreme. So the emergency doctrine is kind of the gold standard in exigent circumstances. Let's say someone is crying for help. Let's say a suspect is fleeing through a person's home. Let's say that someone is claiming that they're destroying evidence in front of your face. All these things are emergencies. So to preserve the chain of custody of evidence, to make sure that a suspect is apprehended, or to make sure that someone that's in need of care is safe. All of these are exigent circumstances where you can enter a person's home or property without any need for a warrant. The problem is this idea of evidence may be destroyed. What this allows you to do is completely circumnavigate warrants just as regular policy. Police officers consistently use exigent circumstances and the idea of evidence being destroyed as a means to search a vehicle, search a home without obtaining a warrant. So for example, someone says that this person was committing a crime. Well, I have reasonable suspicion. Okay, so I detain this individual at their home and I ask them about it. They say I didn't do it. Oh, well, your boyfriend is in the house and he might destroy the evidence of the crime. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab your boyfriend. I'm going to detain him, and then I'm going to search your whole home without a warrant. This is a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment, and it is not quote unquote reasonable because it completely circumnavigates what the Fourth Amendment was intended to protect.
When you do the robbing, it's a robbery. When the cops rob you, it's a civil asset forfeiture.
The last thing I want to discuss is one specific policy. Civil asset forfeiture. Now what civil asset forfeiture is police can basically say that some type of property may or may not have been used in a crime, and therefore they can take that property, keep it as long as they want, never return it, and even sell it for a profit. This is a department policy throughout much of the United States. And the reason I bring this up specifically, this one policy, is that it is an egregious violation of multiple amendments to the Bill of Rights to the Constitution. First and foremost, the Fourth Amendment. It's a warrantless seizure. They are taking your property, they don't have a warrant, and they don't even need to charge you with a crime. They can simply say, well, you have 10 grand on you. No reasonable person would have 10 grand on you, so now this is our department's 10 grand. This has happened multiple times and in several localities. This is a department policy throughout much of the United States. Now, saying I don't need to charge you with a crime is actually, and seizing that property is also a Fifth Amendment violation because you're presumed innocent until proven guilty by a jury of your peers or court of law. If I take your property and say, well, this may or may not have been involved in a crime, so therefore I'm taking it, it's suspicious and I want it, so now our department has your nice car or your, any form of property that they can sell, your flat screen TV, or maybe it's stolen, I don't know. Well, this is a presumption of guilt, right? Because they've stolen your property warrantlessly, and then they're assuming that that you're guilty of whatever crime allowed you to obtain this property or use this property in such a way. And then they just take it and punish you without charging you with a crime. And lastly, this can be seen as a violation of your Eighth Amendment rights, which include excessive fines. If you are charged with a crime and then they steal all of your property that you have on your persons, well, let's say you have $20,000 on your persons. Let's say you were purchasing a rare vehicle and driving to go buy this vehicle with your friends, and so you had $60,000 in cash on you. That might seem suspicious, but if they refuse to give it back, this is effectively a $60,000 fine for no crime being committed. And therefore, this is a violation of the Eighth Amendment. So this one policy alone shows that it is department policy throughout much of the United States that police regularly and intentionally violate your Fourth, Fifth, and Eighth Amendment rights, essentially violating a third of the Bill of Rights in one interaction. I think we should call police oath breakers, because all police are oath breakers, logically, and I believe that I've shown that all police departments, or at least a majority of police departments, consistently violate constitutional rights. And if they're consistently violating your constitutional rights, then they're no longer upholding the oath that they took to protect us from enemies, both foreign and domestic, towards the Constitution. But more importantly, I think Oathbreaker is effective. It's effective because it impugns their honor, and it attacks them at what they value and what they hold dear. And also, I think Oathbreaker presents a unique opportunity to have an insult or a pejorative or a slur or a title that shows our dissatisfaction in a effective and verifiable way. It shows that we're not mad at you because of an ideological bent. We're mad at you because you have done this thing, right? It specifically targets what it is that police are doing that is offensive to us. And so I really believe that we should all start using this term instead of terms like pig or fascist, because those words are intentionally inflammatory, don't attack what needs to be attacked, and then also just doesn't work. And so I hope that everyone watching will join with me in calling police oathbreakers the next time you see them at your local gas station, and hopefully be ready to record, because it might not turn out so well. Thank you for watching. This is just another video from Fabian Liberty. There will be much more interesting content involving things in psychology, sociology, and mostly libertarian politics, as well as a podcast that we do on a somewhat random basis currently, but we hope to plan a schedule in the future so that you can see those. Please follow us on Minds, Gab. We will have a BitChute account soon. We're on Twitch, and we do some light gaming on Twitch as well. And please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching the video.